Good morning. This is Judge Keith Long speaking. I'm the lead ALJ conducting the hearing today for this case. On this panel and on this video conference, we have Judges Andrew Kui and Andrew Wong. We're the administrative law judges deciding this appeal. Because of the ongoing concerns pertaining to the coronavirus and consistent with the governor's executive orders, the Office of Tax Appeals has decided that it is in the public's best interest to move the Office of Tax Appeals June calendar to video conferenced hearings. We are holding these hearings via video conference with the agreement of both the taxpayer and the agency's representatives, and this change will not impact the fair and objective hearings of the tax appeal. If you are unable to connect or are having technical difficulties, you may call in using the telephone number that was provided earlier. Thank you for your patience and flexibility during this time. This hearing will be live streamed to the public, and the audio of this hearing will be transcribed. As this hearing is being live streamed to the public, please do not show your exhibits on the screen. Additionally, please do not use the chat function within Webex. To minimize confusion during the hearing, we ask that participants mute their microphone when they are not speaking. Please repeat your name before speaking and avoid talking over others. If there are any questions during the process, including any questions regarding the technology, the questions should be directed during this call to me, the lead administrative law judge on this appeal. If you become disconnected, please contact Claudia Lopez. Now, before we go on the record, I just want to clarify there are two issues in this case. First is whether any further reduction to the amount of unreported taxable sales is warranted and whether appellant was negligent. Ms. Sheldon and Mr. Lutz, is that your understanding as well?
Yes, Your Honor, it is.
And Mr. Suazo, Brooks, and Parker, is that your understanding as well?
This is Randy Suazo. Yes, it's our understanding.
And prior to the pre-hearing conference, appellant provided 6 exhibits labeled Exhibit A through F. There was no objection at that time. Is that still the case to CDTFA? There's still no objection, correct?
This is Randy Suazo. No objection.
And Ms. Sheldon and Mr. Lutz, prior to the pre-hearing conference, CDTFA submitted exhibits A through E. There were no objections at that time. Is that still the case?
That's still the case, Your Honor. No objections.
And Ms. Sheldon and Mr. Lutz, the pre-hearing conference statement indicates that no additional evidence will be presented at the hearing. I want to confirm that that is still the case as well.
Yes, sir. That remains true.
And CDTFA, I also would like to confirm that there are no additional exhibits.
Not at this time. This is Randy Suazo.
Ms. Sheldon, can you confirm that there are no witnesses to be heard from today?
That is correct, Your Honor. I can. This is Elizabeth Sheldon. Yes, sir. That's true.
And CDTFA, can you please confirm that there are no witnesses today?
This is Randy Suazo. There's no witnesses.
Excellent. The oral hearing should take approximately 1 hour. That includes 10 minutes for appellant's opening statement, 5 minutes for ALJ questions, 15 minutes for the CDTFA's presentation, 10 additional minutes for ALJ questions, and 20 minutes for appellant's rebuttal. The administrative law judges may ask questions at any time. And prior to going on the record, I just want to make sure that Judge Kui and Judge Kui, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready to go on.
And Judge Wong, are you ready to go on?
This is Judge Wong. I'm ready.
Ms. Alonzo, are you ready? We are now going to go on the record. This is the appeal of TMHR Collective Corporation, OTA case number 180-43020. The date is Wednesday, June 17th, 2020. It is approximately 10:15 a.m. The location of this appeal was intended to be heard in Cerritos, California. However, it is being held via video conference as a result of the ongoing coronavirus concerns. I am lead administrative law judge Keith Long, and with me today is Judge Andrew Kui and Judge Andrew Wong. We will be hearing the matter this morning. I am the lead ALJ, meaning I will be conducting the proceedings, but my co-panelists and I are equal participants, and we will all be reviewing the evidence, asking questions, and reaching a determination in this case. Parties, beginning with Ms. Sheldon, please state and spell your names and who you represent for the record.
My name is Elizabeth Sheldon, Elizabeth Sheldon. I represent TMHR Collective Corporation.
And Mr. Lutz?
This is David Lutz representing TMHR Collective Corporation, DAVID Lutz, LUTZ.
And Mr. Suazo?
Randy Suazo, hearing representative. Randy, R-A-N-D-Y, Suazo, S-U-A-Z-O.
Mr. Brooks?
Good morning. This is Christopher Brooks, C-H-R-I-S-T-O-P-H-E-R, Brooks, B-R-O-O-K-S. I'm Captain.
And Mr. Parker?
Hi, Jason Parker, hearing representative, JASON PARKER.
And the purpose of today's hearing is to determine whether any additional reduction to the amount of unreported taxable sales is warranted and whether appellant was negligent. Prior to this hearing, taxpayers submitted exhibits A through F, which are admitted into evidence with no objections. CDTFA has submitted exhibits A through E, which are admitted into evidence with no objections. There are no new exhibits. We will begin with opening statements. Ms. Sheldon, you have up to 10 minutes, and you may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will begin now. It is our position that at the time the BOE, now the CDTFA, did not conduct a legitimate audit and no additional tax is warranted. I will refer specifically to the burden of proof as memorialized in Riley B's Inc. versus BOE. When a taxpayer challenges a notice of determination, the department has the burden to explain the basis for the deficiency. That's also, we see that in the rules for tax appeals, Article 4, conduct of the board meeting and burden of proof, Section 5541. The burden of proof rests with the department. It is our position that the department has not met their burden of proof. With regard to the actual audit, this is where TMHR does raise their primary concern. As found on the CDTFA website, Regulation 1695.5 Audit Procedure, B, the board has a duty and an obligation to utilize its audit resources in the most effective and efficient manner possible. The regulation provides taxpayers and board staff with the necessary procedures and guidance to facilitate the efficient and timely completion of an audit. The regulation also provides for appropriate and timely communication between board staff and the taxpayer of requests, agreements, and expectations related to the audit. Additionally, Section C3 of that same section, site visitations. Regardless of where the audit takes place, board staff may visit the taxpayer's place of business to gain a better understanding of the business operation. For example, plant tour to understand the manufacturing process, or visit a restaurant to observe a seating facility or volume of business. Board staff may not visit secure areas or areas that are regulated by the federal government where federal security clearance is necessary unless authorized by the taxpayer. Board staff generally will visit on a normal workday of the board during the board's normal business hours. In this particular instance, the TMHR was a collective that had medicinal marijuana on premises, and there was a layer of legislation, state legislation, that limited access to the business on a whole, with specific regard to an area where cannabis sales were undertaken. TMHR had a bifurcated store, so the front half of the store was accessible without the need of medicinal marijuana prescription or card or authorization. And it would need such for the back end of the store where the cannabis sales were taking place. It's our understanding that CDTFA at no time entered the premises, but instead chose to conduct their audit by sitting in the parking lot in a car, and according to the audit report, watched people, counted people coming in and coming out. We have received from the CDTFA the logs, which are in evidence, that shows the time and the number of people coming, what appears to be in only. We have received nothing from the CDTFA that would indicate how many people actually left, if any of these people were employees, if people left with any sort of bags or containers, or any sort of remnants that a sale had taken place. We think it's important to note that TMHR in the front half actually offered free food. The location of TMHR was on, let's see, Highland and Santa Monica. I don't know if the judges are familiar with that area, but as far as West Hollywood's concerned, it's a rather depressed area and financially challenged. So there are lots of homeless and indigent people in the area, and as part of the community, TMHR offered free sandwiches, free water. They could go in, they could take them, they could put them in a bag, they could leave. That wouldn't qualify as a purchase of food, let alone anything else. So we have serious concerns that just counting people coming in and coming out and observing absolutely no sale whatsoever is not consistent with the methodologies outlined in the audit manual. I will speak specifically to Section 8 of the CDTFA audit manual when it comes to how an audit should take place and the duration that would qualify as a legitimate audit. The short audit is considered 1 day, 1 business day. As reflected in the papers, TMHR was open from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., or a 10-hour day. The totality of time observed by the CDTFA is arguably 5 hours. One of the days that they chose to sit in the car and watch people go in was October 28th. This is West Hollywood. That's 3 days from Halloween. There is some discussion in the code with regard to close to a holiday, so arguably 5 hours could be considered 4 hours if we disregard the 28th. I'd also like to point out the last day of the observation, which was November 7th. There was a period of time that was observed on the 7th. However, when they came back to do additional observations, the business had closed and had closed permanently. So when we talk about potential unusual circumstances outlined in Chapter 8 of the audit manual, they were closing. They actually had closed on November 7th at about noon, and the audit observation period for November 7th was from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. So it seems quite likely that lots of the people entering that store may have been employees or owners who are going to close out. So we have serious concerns about the conclusion from the CDTFA that people actually walking into a store are now imputed as customers, paying customers who paid the same amount every time somebody walked in the room, bought the same thing for the same amount and came out, when we have absolutely no records of anybody exiting and no observation of any sales, no observation of any medical marijuana coming out of the store, or at least there's no notation in the audit notes that would indicate of that. Though the audit notes do indicate that they counted people coming out, we have no documentation to support that. Specifically with regard to the auditor position, that the auditor used observation method to establish the additional taxable sales since the taxpayer did not provide any reliable records. The CDTFA, BOE at the time, had been explained from the representative of TMHR in 2014 that on August 26th of 14, the IRS had summoned all records from TMHR, and then on September 8th, just a week and a half later, the Los Angeles Police Department raided TMHR, confiscated all records, all paraphernalia, all product. Everything was taken from the store on September 8th. So while we understand that there weren't reliable records, we don't understand why the CDTFA didn't contact the IRS. We tried to contact the police department. Records had been destroyed. So that we understand that there were no reliable records. However, It wasn't for lack of records. It was simply that other authorities had already claimed those records prior to CDTFA getting involved. The other position was the auditor conducted a 4-day observation test at different times to get an average number of customers per an hour for the business. Well, there were lots of overlapping times reflected on the observation. In fact, it looks like most of the times were duplicative. On October 2nd, they were there from 1:50 to 2:50. On October 28th, they were there from 1:30 to 2:30. Both of those, one was a Thursday, one was a Tuesday. On October 7th, they were there from 11 to 12. On 11/7, they were there from 10 to 12. Again, overlapping, one a Tuesday, one a Friday. At no time did they come on a weekend. The audit manual does indicate that if a busy time is a weekend or evening, that the audit should take place on a weekend or evening. No weekend hours, no evening hours were represented in the audit report. Additionally, only 5, potentially 4, legitimate hours of observation were undertaken, and no sales were undertaken. There was some discussion as to why the CDTFA could not enter the store. We don't know if they neglected to reach out to the Department of Health, who could have authorized their attendance in an otherwise restricted area, if they had contacted local law enforcement or the local mayor of West Hollywood. It's hard to believe that CDTFA is simply barred from observational audits from medicinal marijuana collectives, even in 2014. But the fact remains that they observed no sales, and the audit report reflects only people going in. There is no discussion about coming out with any sort of sales, and yet every single person that went in, the CDTFA is representing as purchasing something for $50. And then basing
Ms.
that...
Sheldon?
Yes, sir.
This is Judge Long. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make you aware of the time. If you could please take a minute or two to conclude your opening statement.
I am absolutely at the end. Yes, sir. I'm happy to do it. So again, we find that the imputing sales on people walking into a business and observing absolutely no sales does not qualify as an audit. Spending 4 hours when a minimum of a short audit would be 10 hours, and the short audit's only valid to substantiate a no change or a no change on a change audit. A substantial audit would have been warranted, which would have been 30 hours, 3 days minimum. That was not undertaken. There is no foundation to assess additional tax. And in an analogy to criminal law, it is somewhat similar to the fruit of a poisonous tree. You didn't conduct an audit, yet you've assessed tax. That is our position, Your Honor.
Thank you. This is Judge Long. I am going to open up the floor for questions from my co-panelists. Judge Quee, do you have any questions?
Yes, this is Judge Kui. I do have a couple questions for the taxpayer. And basically, I understand you were saying that the records were destroyed, and that's why you were unable, the taxpayer was unable to provide records to CDTFA to support the reported amounts. Is that correct?
Partially correct, Your Honor. A timely submission of documents to the CDTFA was precluded because those documents were in possession by the LAPD and the IRS, respectively. Subsequently, those records were unavailable to us some years later to try to get them.
Okay, and do you have any documentation to support that the police seized or destroyed records for this business?
I believe the police report was included in, I believe, Exhibit A. I think it starts around page 20. The part of the police procedure, I just know from criminal law that part of the procedure, they were, and in fact, the representative at the time told the CDTFA that the police had come and seized everything. So as far as actual documentation outside of the police report and the representative at the time telling the CDTFA what had come to pass, I have no additional documentation on that end. I do have a copy of the summons from the IRS that is included in one of the exhibits. I believe that might be the last couple pages of A. So beyond those two documents, the police report and the IRS summons, and the log from the auditor reflecting that the prior representative did indicate that they were raided and everything was taken, we have no other documentation, Your Honor.
Okay, so I do see on Exhibit A the police report, the arrest report, and the IRS summons. But in reading those documents, my understanding was that well, I do see that the police also were investigating the business. The honeypot, I assume, is TMHR Corporation. But from the arrest report, it said that they arrested the delivery person, the person delivering product to the business on a probation violation. And I don't understand how arresting the delivery man is related to the seizing of records by the business. I don't see in the report that action was taken against the business. It seemed like it was focused on the delivery person for a probation violation. Could you help clarify that?
Yes, there were two police reports. That first one did indicate that one of their vendors had been arrested in the parking lot. But there was a second police report. I thought that was attached. I apologize. I don't have that right in front of me. I'm going to have to go in and find it. Mr. Lutz, I don't know if you can find that for me. And again, in the case notes from the auditor herself, there are notes from the prior representative indicating that that was in 2013, I think, was when the vendor was arrested. But we do have notes from Kathy Huang when she spoke to prior representative Mr. Fillion on, looks like, September 8th, 2014, which is part of the CDTFA exhibit that does indicate received email from Mr. Fillion stated the business had been raided last week and every single one of the shop people were arrested. All of the inventory and everything in the store was confiscated and destroyed. Mr. Fillion will send the documentation and pictures to the auditor once they get them. So there it is, that within the CDTFA file itself, but there should be a second police report. We did supply the dismissal of charges against CDTFA, so there wouldn't have been a dismissal had there not been an arrest. So I apologize that I do not have my hands on the second police report. Mr. Lutz, were you able to locate that?
This is David Lutz speaking for TMHR. Yes, so I did find the on page 34 of the petitioner's Exhibit A here, starts on page 34, was the documentation regarding the dropped suit from the state of California against Mr. Jeff Beckwith regarding the transportation and distribution of marijuana. I do see that, but I don't see the police report originally with that right at the moment.
Okay, this is Judge Kui. Thank you. If it's in there, we'll look and I will refer to the audit notes that you had. Thank you for that clarification. And I did have one other clarification or just question I was hoping you could help me understand, because in looking at the numbers that were reported by the business for this 3-year audit period, I have $318,000. And is the taxpayer's position that it accurately reported the sales for the audit period, or is there a question that the audit by CDTFA is overstated, but there was some underreporting? Could you clarify your position on that?
Well, when the business closed in 2014 on November 7th, it was due to financial hardship. After the police raid, they were unable to recoup their losses, both to restock and to really carry on. They tried for about 3 months and ultimately failed. So their business, I think the board may be aware, and I don't know if the judges are, that 2012 was their first active year in business. 2013, their second, obviously 2014, their third and final year. So they had a growing business model that got taken out at the knees, if you will. But we do not represent that the returns as filed are incorrect. We have not made that representation at all.
Okay, this is Judge Kui. Thank you. And so I guess what I'm trying to understand here is, because the CDTFA, they have a minimal initial burden to show an error with the reporting, and then once that burden is met, then the burden goes to the taxpayer to show a different result. And what I'm looking at with as far as the reporting, And I do understand the concerns and the frustration that you have with the audit. You know, the $50 per head per person, the amount of the hours with the observation test, just the termination of the business coinciding with the observation test. You know, I understand there's concerns there and that there is issues with support for the audit. As far as the reported numbers, though, that they do seem that they might be low to me. For example, you have the $318,000 over a 3-year period. That's $106,000 per year, or $8,800 per month. And on that amount, the business would have to be paying their worker salaries. They would have to be paying the security guard salaries. The police report did mention there were a lot of security guards. It said there were several security guards. They would also have to purchase product. They'd have to pay rent. They'd have to pay taxes. They'd have to pay overhead. I'm just trying to understand how the business survived for 3 years on an average of $8,800 a month. It seems a little low, and I'm wondering if that's the business reporting such a low amount is sufficient to meet CDTFA's initial burden that there was an issue with the underreporting. I get that there might be some issues with the amount actually calculated being high, and that adjustments might be warranted. I'm just help me understand why $8,800 a month, why that was a reasonable amount for the business to report. If you could understand,
Sure.
If you understand what I'm saying.
No, sir, I think I do understand, and I appreciate the question. Thank you. I will point out again, in 2011, TMHR formed. It was a shell company, not used at that point. 2012 was their first year in business. Any business showing a profit in the first year, frankly, I find to be remarkable. And to have the business continue to grow seems consistent with how I would expect a business to flourish if it is successful. As I pointed out in my original or opening statement, the location of TMHR is one of a depressed neighborhood. So largely the principals involved were there not necessarily to retire to the south of France, but in fact to help the community. In 2014, adult use had not passed. It was purely medicinal. And again, offering food, offering beverages, their goal was to help the community in a very depressed part of West Hollywood. Seems counterintuitive, but West Hollywood does have a depressed part. And in 14, I don't know if you're familiar again with the area, but Hollywood and, Santa Monica and Highland is a very sketchy neighborhood. So I expect, and if you look at the police report, the prices that during the observation period of the Los Angeles Police Department in 2013, they actually took the proactive stance of talking to people coming out of TMHR. They interviewed the clients who were coming out to find out, did they buy anything? How was their experience? Can they take a picture of the medicinal marijuana? These are all questions you'll find inside the police report. And what you'll find is that their prices were remarkably lower than what's being reflected by the BOE at the time, CDTFA today. I think Steve, identified as a white male named Steve in the police report, said he'd been going to TMHR for about a year and spends about $30 on an eighth. He didn't buy anything that day. They interviewed another man who refused to give his name, identified solely as a white male, went in, they interviewed him, and he had bought nothing that day. So I believe that while I understand that those numbers may seem low, I think for a growing business, they're not remarkably atypical. I think given a depressed neighborhood, they were doing well enough to maintain and hopefully grow to a point where they were more profitable. But again, they just started in 2012 in what would be considered, frankly, a rather competitive competitive field, but again, in a depressed neighborhood. So their business model wasn't one to get rich quick, but to become part of the community. So if their sales were low, as long as they were growing, the principals weren't remarkably concerned. They felt there was enough to maintain and enough to move forward. They were able to, I don't think all the security guards were there 24/7. They were open 10 hours a day. I think they had one security guard, maybe two on shift. I think when they closed, probably everybody was there to get their personal belongings, to get whatever they had left there, because the business was closing at noon on November 7th. So I appreciate while the numbers may seem low, I think when you look at the totality of the experience of that business, the short 2.5, 3-year period they were actually opened, that they did in fact continue to grow and report growing sales. And I think in another couple of years we would have seen some much more favorable numbers. But again, their prices were low intentionally for the community, and their goal really wasn't to, again, have this be get rich quick, but in fact to be a large growing part of the community and help. I think over time those numbers would have reflected higher, but they were not in business for very long.
Oh, thank you. This is Judge Quee again, and I did have just one question before I turn it over or turn it back to the panelists for additional questions that they may have. You had mentioned a couple times that the business handed out food products for free to the community, and I don't believe I saw reference to that previously in the CDTFA's decision, or if it was there, I just missed it. And I'm wondering if there's any documentation in the record that had referenced the handouts that you're referring to.
I wouldn't expect to see it from CDTFA since they never entered the premises. So I don't believe that CDTFA knew what anybody was walking out with or without, or what was inside. They don't think they got out of the car and looked into the window or looked into the front door where they could have gotten in. And frankly, we believe that they would have received authorization to go in and do an actual audit where they actually observe sales. So I'm not surprised it's not in the CDTFA record because they never entered the premises. This information is coming from the principal, Jeff Beckwith, and I apologize if that was omitted from my submission. I believe it was in a narrative that I submitted, but I apologize if that was omitted. I thought I put it in there. I'm pretty sure I did, but I apologize if I omitted that. That was not my intention. But no, as I say, there were, if you look at the police report, there's a front room and there was a back room, and the front room is where the free food, drinks, etc. were located. So CDTFA did have access to that. They just chose not to enter the premises.
This is Judge Quee. Thank you very much. I will turn it back to the lead judge, Judge Long.
This is Judge Long. Judge Wong, do you have any questions?
This is Judge Wong. I had no questions for appellant at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a few questions for appellant before we move on. With respect to the statement of activity, appellant Exhibit A, pages 37 through 43, you indicated that 2012 was the first year that the Honey Spot was in business, and the statement of activity for 2011 is blank, but if you look at Exhibit A, page 48, you'll see that in the fourth quarter of 2011, the business reported $24,008 in gross receipts and just over $2,000 in sales tax. When did the business actually open?
The first day of business. I don't believe I have that information. Mr. Lutz, do you have that information?
This is David Lutz for TMHR. I do not have that information, but the California Secretary of State should have the inception date of the entity. It was officially formed, but I don't have the opening day of business.
Okay, thank you. And additionally, with respect to the statements of activity, were those kept contemporaneously with the business being operated, or were those created at some point afterward?
It's my understanding they were contemporaneous, but that is simply my understanding.
Okay. And with respect to the criminal case, I saw the dismissal from the DA regarding the criminal case. However, I couldn't tell from the exhibit where in the DA information it shows that the case was dismissed because the Honey Spot failed to make a sufficient profit, which I believe was your assertion.
I think that was Mr. Sharmat's assertion. It was, in fact, when we spoke to Mr. Beckwith, he told us, we probably should have brought him in as a witness. I do apologize to all your honors, that the reason they closed in November was after the police raid, they were ostensibly done. They were completely tapped and couldn't recuperate. So I don't think there was necessarily a financial hardship until Los Angeles Police Department came in and seized everything. So I think that's ultimately what caused the demise of TMHR was was the raid from the Los Angeles Police Department, despite the fact that charges were dropped, that didn't recoup any of the things that were seized and not returned to TMHR. I'm not sure if I've addressed your question. I apologize.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to CDTFA for their opening statements. You may begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you. This is Randy Suazo. The appellant is a California corporation and operated a medical marijuana dispensary, selling marijuana and marijuana-related items, along with accessory items. The store was located in Los Angeles. The appellant was open 10 hours a day from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day of the week. A timely notice of termination was issued on January 12, 2015. It is unknown how the appellant reports because no records other than the income tax returns were provided during the course of the audit or appeals procedure. The appellant did not provide any sales receipts, sales invoices, cash register tapes, POS system summaries, purchase records, or general and subsidiary ledgers. The appellant also stated that since they were a marijuana dispensary, they did not have a bank account for their business. The department performed an examination for the period from October 1st, 2011 through September 30th, 2014. The department compared gross sales per federal income tax returns to the appellant's sales and use tax returns for the calendar years 2012 and 2013. No differences were noted. A daily average sales amount was computed by using the reported taxable sales and dividing by the number of days in the quarter. Then a daily number of sales was obtained by dividing the average daily sales by an average customer purchase of $50, obtained from the department's experience in conducting audits of marijuana dispensaries. For the audit period, the department calculated the appellant was reporting an equivalent of only 6 sales per day. During the period from 1Q 2012 to 1Q 2013, a 5-quarter period, only 3 customers per day was being handled. An average sales per hour was derived by using the sales per day and dividing it by the hours the store was open. This showed barely more than half a sale per hour, or only 2 sales every 2 hours, only 1 sale every 2 hours. Based on the very low daily sales and sales per hour, along with the fact that the appellant did not have any records to review, the auditor elected to conduct an observation test of the business. The department conducted 4 observation tests, Exhibit D, pages 43 to 48. They were done on Thursday, October 2nd, 2014, Tuesday, October 7th, 2014, Tuesday, October 28th, 2014, and finally Friday, November 11th, or November 7th, 2014. No further observation test could be conducted as the business has closed. The observation test revealed that an average of 10 customers entered the premises per hour. A $50 per customer sales amount was multiplied by the 10 customers per hour found in the observation test, and hourly sales of $500 was established. The $500 amount was then multiplied by 10 hours the dispensary was open to compute daily sales of $5,000 per day. Exhibit D, page 42. The projected daily sales was multiplied by the days in the quarter with an allowance for the store to be closed during holidays. An allowance of 11 holidays per year was allowed. The audited sales were then compared to reported sales in order to establish appellant's unreported taxable sales. Exhibit D, page 40. It should be noted that per a website dealing with this industry, www.mjbizdaily.com, the average California customer purchase is $70. The U.S. average sales per customers range from $60 to $70 per transaction. By using the $50 sales amount instead of the $70 sales amount, the appellant's ratio of sales to customers making an average California purchase is about 7 out of every 10 customers. Therefore, 3 customers would not be making any purchase at all had they entered into the store. During the audit and appeals process, the appellant and the representative were asked many times to produce records to support their sales, yet they never produced any. The appellant's representative asserts that the appellant gave all its records to the IRS in accordance with an IRS summons. However, the summons only requested limited records for the periods from 2006 and early 2007, 4 years prior to the beginning of the CDTFA audit. This is on Exhibit A, page 10, 14, 15, and 16 on the DNR, decision recommendation. Further, the IRS requested those records by summons appearance dated date of July 11, 2014. Yet the appellant has not provided any detailed data from any point after July 11, 2014 through the end of the audit period, including the time frame when the observation tests were actually being conducted. The auditor was planning to do additional observation tests at the appellant's facility, however, the location was closed. Review of the appellant's fourth quarter 14 sales and use tax returns shows 0 sales reported by the appellant for that quarter, even though they were open for a portion of the quarter and the auditor tracked customers entering the facility. The appellant did not supply any video surveillance tapes of the inside of the store to at least attempt to show that a lower number of customers made purchases. Instead, the appellant states that in their opening brief dated November 16, 2018, this is Appeal Brief Part 1, page 3, that they were raided in sometime late August or early September by the Hollywood Narcotics Information Unit, and all tapes were seized. However, they still would have been recording for periods after the raid and during the dates of the observation test. Yet no video surveillance tapes were given to disprove the audit findings. Review of police reports provided by the appellant, Appeal Brief Part 1, Attachment 5, pages 1 and 3, show that on August 26, 2013, police watched approximately 10 customers enter or exit the business for this time period from 7:15 to 8:15, which matches the audited average 10 customers per hour. The police report was written 14 months before the auditor's observation test. Review of police reports also showed that the appellant made bulk purchases of product to sell. This is on Appeal Brief Part 1, Attachment 5, pages 5 and 6 of Supplier's Arrest Report dated July 17, 2013. Review of the police reports in unison with the sales tax reporting disclosed that there was sudden increases in sales following the monitoring of the business activities by law enforcement. Example being, A, appellants reporting to the department disclosed that the reported sales more than doubled when police apprehended a supplier of the appellant when he was delivering to the appellant. B, sales again doubled after the police had begun investigation into the taxpayer's business. This is on for the fourth quarter of 2013. Review of the federal income tax returns for 2012 and 2013 disclosed that the appellant did not list any payroll, wage, or wage expense for employees. Exhibit D, page 50. Based on the police report, the appellant had security personnel on premises. In addition, they had employees selling to customers in the store. Yet recorded wages were non-existent. The appellant states in their opening brief dated November 16, 2018, Appeal Brief 1, page 3, number 4, that if the appellant was making what the department has determined that the company would still be in business. Review of the department's records show that TMHR Collective Corporation did again start their business under a new permit commencing August 1st, 2016. The department believes that the negligence penalty is also warranted, as no records other than the federal income tax returns have been provided. An indirect method had to be used to determine the amount of taxable sales made by the appellant, and the amount of the assessment is significant in relation to what was reported. The appellant has not provided any documentation to support their contentions. Therefore, the department requests that the appeal be denied. This concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you. This is Judge Long. At this time, I would like to turn it over to my panel for any questions. Judge Cui, do you have any questions at this time?
Yes, this is Judge Cui. I did have a couple questions for CDTFA. When you tallied up the average of people coming in per hour, for example, if you had 10 people on one day, did that count as an individual person, or if, for example, a group of 3 people walked in, would that be considered as one person, or would that be considered as 3 people?
I believe that would have been considered as 3 persons.
Okay, and as far as CDTFA, and this is Judge Kui again, as far as CDTFA coming up with the $50 spend per person, and then you also mentioned that there was a New Jersey Daily article indicating the average in California statewide was $70 per purchase. I'm wondering, how did you come up with the $70 purchase per person? Is that taking into consideration the location of this business? Like I just don't see any support for where you came up with the $50 figure for this business.
The $50 amount is based on Southern California transactions for marijuana dispensaries. The $70 comes from a industry provided publication that showed $70 was the average purchase for a customer in California.
So this is Judge Kui. If I understand correctly, CDTFA has records or information that would indicate in Southern California the average spend per person per visit is $50. Is that what CDTFA is saying?
I believe they're saying that obtained from the department's experience in conducting audits of marijuana dispensary.
Okay, thank you. And as far as determining that every person who went in there made a purchase, is that I'm just trying to understand why that is reasonable. I mean, for example, if you look at the police report, and as discussed earlier, you know that this business was under police investigation. There's a report in the conclusion of the police report. It says that it is our opinion that the Honey Spot began turning customers away for not having the recommendation. That's their marijuana card on their person or in their system. So, I mean, there is some evidence suggesting that the business stopped selling to customers that came in without a card after a certain point, based on the police investigation, and that was done before your observation test. So your observation test came after the police investigation, which suggests that there is some evidence to show people were being turned away. I'm just wondering why it's reasonable to assume that every single person that walked into the business was making a purchase.
On the police report that claimed that, if you look right after that police report was done, sales more than doubled. So they went from 30 to 60,000 basically. And as they found out, I guess they, under the observation of police observation. In addition, when the $50, if you were to take it as a California generic, which is what the industry standard was for $70, basically what that is doing is saying that 7 out of every 10 would have made a purchase. However, 3 would not have made a purchase.
Okay, this is Judge Quid. Thank you. And just so I understand what those tally marks in the audit report mean, did CDTFA do any contact with people coming out to ask if they were going to the business, if they made a purchase, or was it basically just as every person that walked in, there was a tally, there was no communication done with the customers?
Based on the audit report, it's silent as to that. However, it doesn't appear that they did make any communication.
Okay, thank you. And this is Judge Kui again. Just also, so I'm understanding, why was it that the CDTFA auditor did not, for example, go into the business? Is there any indication in the record, in the file, that the taxpayer turned them away and wouldn't allow them to observe inside the business? Is there a health or safety concern? I'm just trying to understand why it is that the auditor would be sitting, outside the business, just telling people coming in and coming out, as opposed to other audits where you have, for example, the auditor sitting inside the store for the full 8-hour business day on 3 separate days, with the consent of the taxpayer making marks. I'm just trying to understand why it folded out this way as opposed to differently.
Well, they had asked for records, as was stated earlier, and no records were forthcoming. They say that the records were confiscated by or taken by IRS. However, there was records after that. Nothing was forthcoming. There was videotapes that they say that the police took. However, they would have video recordings after that. None of that was ever provided. That would have been very helpful at the time. And they failed to provide any of that. As to why they didn't, why the auditor didn't enter, might have been a safety issue, as the taxpayers' representative themselves say. The neighborhood is probably not the best. However, that would also mean that if you're going to go there, you're probably going to make more than your usual amount of purchases, so you won't have to go there again.
Okay, thank you. And if just perhaps you could help me understand if how this audit was conducted for this dispensary, is that consistent generally with how audits of dispensaries are conducted? Because I know, for example, restaurants, you have in your audit manual, the section discussed earlier, that you have that rule or the general policy, 3 full days. And with audits of dispensaries, it seems that you don't necessarily follow that similar policy. Do you have, based on your experience, was this audit handled consistently with how CDTFA handles audits of dispensaries generally, or is this, would you say, different?
Well, normally when we deal with dispensaries, we are given books and records. And because we were not given the books and records, we had to do alternative means. Again, the book and records that could have been provided after they say that they gave either to the IRS or were confiscated by the police, there would have been books and records after that fact, and they could have given it to the auditor at that point as well, and they failed to do so. Also, the IRS request was for a period that was 4 years prior to the audit. And in addition, if they had a CPA or a bookkeeper, they probably would have had a lot of the records electronically still. So to say that they didn't have books and records, they may not have had physical, but they probably would have had computerized books and records. So normally when we do an audit of a dispensary, we do get books and records. If we're not given books and records, we have to do the best way we can. In this case, because of the neighborhood, because of the situation of being involved, because of the lack of cooperation from the taxpayer, because of the lack of, again, records, they did an observation test. They did 5 hours. However, that also corresponds, or 10 customers per hour. However, that does correspond to the police report, in which was done 14 months earlier, which the police themselves state that 10 customers entered.
This is Judge Quee. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to the panel. I'll turn it back to the lead judge.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is Judge Long. Judge Wong, do you have any questions at this time?
Hi, this is Judge Wong. I do have a couple questions for CDTFA regarding the observation test. So the auditor observed 10 persons per hour, customers per hour. Is that correct?
On average, yes.
On average, and then assume that 100% of the customers made purchases. Is that correct?
At a $50 clip, yes.
At a $50 clip. And then you referenced a $70 average purchase price, and the difference between the $50 average purchase price and the $70 purchase price is 3 customers per hour. Is that correct?
3 customers per hour would not be, 3 customers that enter would not be buying any merchandise.
Per hour or per
hour,
day?
yes, the way it works out on this one.
Okay.
So there was, sorry.
So you factor in customers who didn't make purchases into the average purchase price rather than the 10 person per hour average?
Well, that's the way it works out when you look at the industry average.
Okay. Okay. So, sorry, this is Judge Wong again. So I had also a question about the police report. You mentioned their police observed 10 persons per hour entering the business. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I noticed in the police report, it mentioned some individuals didn't purchase, some of those individuals who came out didn't purchase anything for customer service issues or because they were turned away, would that affect the 10-person per hour average?
If you're using $50, it would affect. If you're using $70, it would already factor in.
Okay. So if you had factored in 7 persons per hour multiplied by $70 purchases, would that affect, or that would just come out the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty close.
Okay. No further questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Judge Long. I have a few questions before we move on. First, with respect to this $70 average sales price, where in the record is this supported, and where in the record is there any indication that the auditor took this into account?
It's not in the record that the auditor took it into account, but it's in my analysis of how this would play out. The $70 per hour is quoted in the DNR, the decision recommendation. And it is on Exhibit A, page 5. He also has the website listed on there.
Okay. And this is Judge Long again. With respect to the website and the contemporaneous information, let me just go up to this page. Is that contemporaneous to the DNR, or was that contemporaneous to the time where the audit took place?
I think it would work under both circumstances.
So, just to be clear, the average price, your position is that the average price per purchase didn't change at all between 2013 and April 7th, 2016?
The $70 is a 2015 figure, okay? If you look at you would have to use a COLA or a inflation factor if you want to go back, right? But in 2012 and 13, the inflation rate is very low. If you look at the US inflation rates.
Okay. And I just want to make sure the audit work papers, which is respondents Exhibit E, page 25, the auditor attempted a 5th observation test on November 7th, 2014, and found that the business had closed. The notes in the audit work papers state that the business termination date is unknown. Is there any dispute that the business was closed for good on November 7th?
I can't tell you for sure because it doesn't say when the business actually closed. I'm using what the taxpayer or what the auditor put on the 414Z. Okay, and then also though, again, on the 4th quarter return, there was no sales, even though there's obviously activity since they were doing observation tests in October.
Okay, and with respect to follow up on Judge Quee's question regarding the number of people that walked in, to be clear, Exhibit E, page 26, the observation test for October 2nd, shows that 5 people walked in at 2:18 p.m. CDTFA's position that every one of those people made a purchase and they were all individual purchases?
That's the way it would play out based on their scenario.
Okay, and now, based on the auditor scenario or based on your scenario
Based on
regarding the $70?
Based on the auditor scenario.
Okay, and then based on the scenario that you presented to us today with respect to the $70, you would say that
4 out of 5.
1.5 of these 5 people did not make a purchase. However, that doesn't matter because the average price that was used in the audit was less than the average price that of a sale in California, which is in the decision and recommendation.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay. And with respect to the observations that occurred, the DNR responded Exhibit A, page 8, indicates that the audit deviated from CDTFA standard policies, requiring at least 3 full days of observation. It cites to both the audit manual as well as an October 28th, 2015 memorandum. Was that because the business closed?
The observation test being cited is for a restaurant. It's chapter 8.
And does the October 28th, 2015 memorandum apply to restaurants as well?
That I do not know.
Okay. And with respect to the observation days that did occur, can you comment on the dates that were used? That they're sometimes weeks apart.
That's when the auditor happened to pick those days. Basically, they were trying to get days where they can gather information. I would take it that if they were going to come back on November 7th, they were going to come back for more and more days. However, unfortunately, the business closed.
Okay. And so with respect to the audit dates that did occur, is there any information or clarification that you can provide as to why all of the observation occurred between the hours of 10 and 2:50 p.m. and no other times that the business was open?
I would assume because it's business hours for the employee. In other words, if they're going to go after 5 o'clock, then you're going to have you might have a different issue.
Okay.
But again, the taxpayer or the appellant could have supplied videotapes as well. Even though they said they were confiscated during the raid, there would have been videotapes after the fact, and they could have supplied those.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions. At this time, I'm going to turn over to Ms. Sheldon for her rebuttal and closing statement. Thank you.
Judge Long, this is Judge Kui. I just had one quick follow-up question for CDTFA, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
CDTFA, Mr. Suazo, you had mentioned on a number of occasions that the appellant, that the taxpayer could have turned over video surveillance. And that seems something that's not normally requested by CDTFA. I'm just wondering if there's any evidence in the record that CDTFA actually asked for video surveillance of the taxpayer's premises.
Sometimes when observation tests are, this is Randy Suazo again. Sometimes when observation tests are done, we do ask for video surveillance cameras because it's right next to the register. You're able to see the ring up and stuff. And most companies, when they do their, just for internal control, they want to see to make sure that the sale is actually being rung up. Okay. And basically, whether or not video surveillance was requested, I do not know. However, it could have been volunteered by the appellant to help support their contention. And it would have been reviewed by the auditor or the audit staff, whoever was going to be taking over the case. We have done that before.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the response. I'll turn it back over to Judge Long.
This is Judge Long. Ms. Sheldon, you may begin your rebuttal and closing statement whenever you're ready.
I'm sorry, Judge Long, I'm not clear. Am I permitted to ask questions, Mr. Suazo, CDTFA?
No, Mr. Suazo is not acting as a witness for CDTFA in the same way that they're not allowed to ask questions of you. They're simply arguing the facts that are on the record. So nothing that they are saying is testimony.
I understand. Thank you, Your Honor. Appreciate the clarification. This is Elizabeth Sheldon for TMHR. It is my understanding that the $70 foundational price that was used by BOE at the time, CDTFA today, was from mjbizdaily.com. That is a news site for the marijuana industry. It is not a marketing site where they actually do any deep dive into marketing sale prices. That's not their primary function. They're a news outlet or resource for people in the industry, in the medical marijuana industry. There are sites like weed.com that does do things like that. More specifically, TMHR had its own website that included prices. Including the police report also reflected interviews with actual clients who actually made purchases, reflecting prices of around $30 to $40. And it did indicate at least 2 people making no purchase whatsoever. So we feel very strongly that the $50 imputed is well in excess of what actually TMHR was charging. Again, they were in a rather depressed community, and their point was to assist the community, not to price them out, to where people who are native to that area did not have access to medicine that would be helpful to them. That was their point. With regard to the paperwork that was kept being requested by CDTFA, again, they were raided. Everything was taken in in August, prior to the audit. So should there have been additional documents after the raid? Potentially. They never really got back on their feet. With regard to video footage, it is my understanding that the video camera may also have been confiscated by Los Angeles Police Department. I do know that TMHR representative, prior to my attendance, spent a great deal of time trying to locate the video from the Los Angeles Police Department and was told that too much time had passed, that had been destroyed. So the TMHR was very anxious to get that video footage to CDTFA, but was unsuccessful in getting it back from Los Angeles Police Department. With regard to 3 people going in together and each one being imputed as a customer, to me seems, rather presumptive. A group of people can go into a shop and shop together and one person buys something, somebody doesn't. And imputing sales and everybody who walks in the door, it seems to me patently unreasonable, especially when the police report specifically says that that just wasn't the case. They interviewed people who went in and came out and bought nothing. We also believe that people went in, got free food, left. So we find that the conclusions based on the $50 per person walking in the store to be very random and unsubstantiated. Additionally, we understand that Section 8 of the audit manual is with regard to restaurants. That was actually cited by the CDTFA, so we did follow suit. However, also in Section 4, it does talk about the very limited testing or sampling and the fact that that's only appropriate for a no change or a no change phase in a change report, and that to test for substantial changes that must have sufficient verification, and that's recommended to be 3 days, or in this particular case, 30 hours. So it remains our position that there was no authentic audit conducted. It doesn't look as though they tried to enter the business. It is a depressed neighborhood. However, it was a security guard on duty. There was no palpable risk. The police report did not indicate that there were various crimes going on inside the strip mall while their observation period was undertaken. I don't understand why an auditor whose job it is to go in and audit sales didn't go in to a business and audit sales. So it seems like all they did was count people going into a shop is really what they did. And from there, imputed sales, imputed $50 of sales, even though, again, the website for that actual dispensary existed. It doesn't look like that was relied upon. Prices were on the board inside the dispensary. That was never observed. And from the audit manual, it doesn't appear as though a legitimate audit was ever conducted. So our position remains that the burden of proof stays with the CDTFA to substantiate the additional tax assessed based on an audit. Our position in audit never really happened. That what they did is they observed people walking into a business and then made some very general assumptions. There's no information about coming out. There's no information about coming out with product, any kind of product, be that medical marijuana, be it a pipe, be it a sandwich. There's no indication, there's no written record of anybody coming out having purchased anything. Only people walking in and then imputing sales to these individuals who walked into the store. So the front half of the store being accessible to the general public, people could have very curiosity. They're in West Hollywood, they're in Hollywood, that's actually the border. Come in, oh, I've never been inside a dispensary, let me go in and look. According to CDTFA, that person went in and bought $50 worth of something and then came back out. So our position does remain that they don't have a foundation to substantiate additional tax assessments. We do understand that the period between October and November 7th may be an opportunity for TMHR to revisit whatever documents may exist. They don't have a bank account because the federal government under FinCEN doesn't allow this industry to have a bank account. So those records could not exist by law. So that would not be something that they would be able to provide. They would love to have had a bank account. Unfortunately, that is not something that's afforded to that industry even today. With regard to the paperwork, receipts, et cetera, again, August, those were confiscated. So 2 months later, they still hadn't been returned. That's why they weren't submitted. And then ultimately, the business closed before they got it back from Los Angeles Police Department. So I understand that the CDTFA would love to get all this paperwork. TMHR would have loved to have been able to provide it had Los Angeles Police Department not confiscated everything. So at this point, our position does remain that there was no substantiated audit that would allow the CDTFA to assess additional tax at this time. Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, sorry, I unmuted myself. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Sheldon. I'm going to turn the hearing over to my co-panelists for any final questions. Judge Quee, do you have any final questions?
I actually, for the taxpayer, I'll ask what question, may I ask what question you were going to ask, CDTFA?
Yes, sir. I was going to inquire as to why it is the auditor never attempted to observe sales and legitimize the audit and put in the hours necessary. As we've seen in the audit report, the observations started in very early October and went through about 5 weeks. And within that 5-week period, one would assume that they could get at least 10, if not all 30 hours completed. But unfortunately, that was not done. I would like to know why no weekends were included. Generally, with medicinal marijuana dispensaries, weekends are often a busier time. Lunchtimes, they did observe, which is another busy time. But did they talk to the taxpayer with regard to when is their busy time? When's a good time to see your sales and to observe them and do this audit? So my questions were really more along the lines of why a more substantive audit, one that was consistent with multiple sections within the audit manual, was not attempted. That was really my primary form of question.
Thank you. And I guess I will ask CDTFA, from the audit record, again, this is Judge Quee, was there any discussion with the taxpayer over the days that would be observed, over the timing and I guess if these days were, these were good days to observe the business? Was there any discussion over how that was proceeded and why, for example, weekends weren't used, or what time of days, why the times of days, the 1 hour blocks were used that the auditor did use?
This is Randy Suazo again. There's nothing in the audit working papers as to why the particular days were used. However, all communication was through the taxpayer's representative at the time. So, and I basically think that's the way they wanted it to go through the rep. So when you're asking if they contacted the place directly, they were contacting the representative, which they were instructed to do.
This is Jason Parker. I'd like to add on to that. In the 414Z for the audit, the auditor did indicate that the taxpayer and the representative were not cooperating with the audit. So it didn't appear that they were returning phone calls or emails to the auditor. So the auditor basically had to conduct the business or the observation test without discussing it with the taxpayer or the rep, because they weren't signing waivers and returning phone calls.
This is Judge Quee. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Judge Long.
Judge Long, this is Elizabeth for Liz Sheldon for TMHR. I'm sorry, that is a new point. Would I be permitted to address that?
This is Judge Long.
I'll let that go.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Ms.
so
Sheldon.
yes, TMHR did have a representative. I see throughout the notes that there are claims from the CDTFA that the representative is non-responsive. Regulations allow them, the CDTFA, to bypass power of attorneys or representatives if they're non-responsive for 2 weeks. According to the log, that never came to pass. The representative at the time was responsive, it looks like, in one instance the next day, one instance about 10 days later, during the course of the time that they've been rated. And the representative would have been authorized to discuss good times to come in for the audit. Part of being a representative for any taxpayer is being able to make those determinations or work with the taxpayer to find those times. So we believe that that was something that was available to CDTFA through the representative.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sheldon. Judge Wong, do you have any final questions?
I had one final, this is Judge Wong. I had one final question for CDTFA. Sometimes when auditing, I know CDTFA looks at similar businesses and compares them to the business that they're auditing. Was CDTFA contemporaneously auditing other medical marijuana dispensaries in that area? And if so, were they able to formulate an average per sale, average sale price or per purchase?
This is Randy Suazo again. In the notes or the audit, it doesn't say so. However, they did get the $50 per sale from something of that nature.
Sorry, could you expand? This is Judge Wong. Could you expand on what you mean by that nature?
Well, based on the audit, it says that the obtained the department's $50 is obtained from the department's experience in conducting audits of marijuana dispensaries.
This is Judge Wong. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
This is Judge Long. I just had one final question as well, following up from the earlier discussion regarding the $70 price that's discussed in the decision and recommendation. I just wanted to follow up with respect to, I'm looking at Exhibit D, page 27 currently, and it says that the $50 average sales per customer was used based on the average audited sales per a customer of similar types of audits performed in the local vicinity. I just wanted to verify CDTFA used this amount because it was local to the honey spot. Is that correct, Mr. Suazo?
Based on what you just read, I would believe so.
Okay, thank you. That is my final question. Ms. Sheldon, thank you for your time today. Mr. Lutz, thank you for your time today. Is there anything else that you prepared or would like us to hear before we conclude the case?
Thank you. This is Elizabeth Sheldon for TMHR. Thank you, Your Honor. No, I believe at this point, really our position remains that the foundation for the assessment is catastrophically flawed. So that does remain our position.
Okay, thank you. This concludes the hearings. The judges will meet and decide the case based on the documents and testimony presented and admitted as evidence today. We'll send both parties our written decision no later than 100 days from today. Thank you for your participation. The case is now submitted and the record is closed. The hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.